Thank you. Thank you, everyone, joining today. And thank you very much to this user group for keeping the message, the content, the education for SQL alive to a lot of people, not just in the US, but around the world. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for inviting me here today. Maybe you saw the news. We made a fairly big announcement at Microsoft Ignite about the next release of SQL Server. So it's an honor for me to get a chance to come here today to talk a little bit about it. As Taya mentioned, let's talk about a few logistics about our time together today. Put your questions in the chat window for sure. I'll take a break halfway through the presentation, ask Taya to kind of unmute himself, and then ask me some of the questions on the chat. But let's make an agreement together today. Let's focus your questions on what you see that I'm presenting today versus perhaps maybe speculation about, hey, is this going to be in SQL Server? Something I've been asking for a long time, maybe some feature. Let's kind of shelve those aside for today and just focus on what we're going to present today. Now, here's the good news. This is the first time you may have been seeing the message about SQL Server 2025. As you can imagine, in the next calendar year, there'll be other opportunities where you'll see me, others, and from Microsoft talk about more details about the release. In addition, at the end of this session, I'll have a link for you if you'd like to join the private preview program, so you can sign up for that. So wait for the very end of today's presentation to see what that link looks like so you can go do that. Also, the content that I have today I will not be able to share. I don't do that during the private preview period. But in the next slide, I'll show you a link where you can download the deck and even go watch the recording from a session I did at Microsoft Ignite where I talk about SQL Server 2025. And this is presentation today. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a bit of an overview first of the themes of 2025, some logistics, some FAQ questions about 2025. Then we'll spend a little more time than most other sections on AI, because AI is new to a lot of people. It's a new thing we're putting in SQL Server. So I felt it was important that we get a pretty good grounding for all of you. Sorry for that pun, on what we're doing for AI. But we'll also talk about other features and other capabilities we're putting into the release. In some cases, I know you're going to want to dive deeper. I do have a couple of demos to show you on AI. But again, as we move to the next calendar, you're going to see more of that. So with that said, let me go dive in and start talking a little bit about it. So this was a slide that showed up in Scott Guthrie's keynote at Microsoft Ignite for the announcement of the private preview for SQL Server 2025. I'll talk some logistics here shortly about timing for public preview and general availability a little bit shortly. But notice here the theme. Number one underneath here is that SQL Server 2025 is now going to be, in our mind, for you as our customers, an enterprise AI-ready database from ground to cloud, which means you're going to be able to build AI applications on premises now with SQL Server, or you can connect your SQL Server to the cloud if you'd like to, or even run it like in a virtual machine in Azure in the cloud. But I call it enterprise ready because we believe, and as many of you as our customers believe, it is an enterprise product. And so I know a lot of different products out there, databases are claiming to be an AI-ready database, but we feel SQL Server, for what you've known and loved over the years, is enterprise ready. So that's kind of why we're having this term called enterprise AI-ready database. And the major three themes are this, although I'm going to have some more overview of other things we're doing in the release, is that AI capabilities are going to be built in to the SQL Server database, which I think a lot of people are going to like because they love the security model of SQL Server. So if you're concerned about privacy and security, SQL can be that way to a mechanism for you to make that happen. We do have investments in security and performance and availability. And so we still always make sure in any release we do that. We'll talk shortly about that in the second half. And then SQL Server will always be ARC connected. There's some features in SQL 25 that are special that light up with ARC connection. And then we also want to be Fabric connected. So for example, SQL Server 2025 will be enabled for Fabric mirroring. Now, these resources you see at the bottom of your slide, the first one is a blog post by our Vice President, Assad Khan, talking about more details about the release. And then at the bottom of that slide is the name of the session at Microsoft Ignite. So for example, hey, I wouldn't mind getting a hold of some slides that were presented about SQL 25 at Ignite. You can go on the Microsoft Ignite website and then go pull up that session code and find a recording that you can watch. And you can see me, Joe Sack, and Aaron Stellato talk about SQL 25. And in addition, you can download the presentation if you'd like. So that's a way to get hold of some slides that we've released publicly about the release. Okay, so maybe you've seen me in the past talk about this concept that SQL is a ground to cloud product. And what that means is that SQL shows up everywhere you need it. Develop an application once, deploy it anywhere. And that could be on premises, that could be in Linux and Kubernetes, that could be enabled by Arc on premises or even in multi-clouds. It could be Azure SQL in the form of VMs, databases, managed instances. And if you didn't know and hadn't seen the announcement, it also exists now in the Fabric as a product, as an operational database, SQL database and Fabric. So now I've changed my messaging that SQL is the next generation AI database ground to cloud to Fabric. And if you look at the foundation of all of this, the T-SQL language, as you know, is pretty consistent across all of this. The database engine is consistent across all of this. The tools like Management Studio, which you'll see a demonstration today of the new version of Management Studio, works consistently across this. We even have co-pilots now to assist you both running in the cloud and even on premises in Management Studio. And then we want to know that when you see about the concepts of building an AI database and have confidence that I can consistently get that built-in AI support, I want to do it anywhere SQL exists. And so you're going to see that message that AI built-in exists the same way across all of this. And then we always want to be connected to the Fabric. Even though databases exist in the Fabric, it's our intention to make sure that you can mirror a SQL Server database anywhere you see on here into the Fabric itself. So that's kind of an idea for you to think in terms of like, where is SQL exist? Like, how can I use it? How can I use it in a consistent way? So one thing that I learned a lesson several years ago was the fact that I would talk about what's new in a release of SQL Server, and I would have a customer on an older version of SQL Server, which is not your fault. You know, it runs great for you. But what I missed in my messaging was to remind folks of what's been in previous releases that, of course, are cumulatively available in this release. So if you're on SQL 16 today and you're not familiar with what's in SQL 17 and 19 and 2022, keep that in mind. Make sure you understand that everything you see here on the screen and more is available if you're going to upgrade, say, from SQL 14 or 16 into 2025. And then also know that in some of these areas, we're actually enhancing what you see on the screen here in 2025 itself. So we're building on a foundation of what we've been doing in the previous few years. Now, in past years as well, in past releases, I always have some sort of overview slide, like one slide. I call it my camera slide. Like, what can you look at to get a picture in your mind visually of the major capabilities that are new to a version of SQL Server? And that's what this slide is. This is an overview of the major categories of what we're doing. So at the top, I call this the areas of innovation. And again, we're going to focus quite a bit today to talk about what's built in for AI for SQL Server 2025. In the middle, we want to make sure we integrate your data with Fabric in all cases seamlessly. And so that's where Fabric mirroring comes into play. We'll briefly talk about that as well. And then I'm very excited on the right-hand side to bring now into SQL Server some missing features for developers that have not been there for some time. So I can't wait to kind of show you a slide that kind of overviews a little bit of what we're doing for developers. And that's orthogonal to doing AI type applications. Now in the middle, this is the core meat and potatoes of SQL Server. Adding functionality for security, adding functionality for performance and availability. And when we get to those areas, there are more things coming in SQL Server 2025 that I'm not going to talk about today, but you're going to hear about next calendar year. But you'll get a good overview of some of the things we're doing in the actual just core engine space. And then as I kind of showed you earlier with the ground to cloud to Fabric slide, I want to make sure you understand that what we're doing here is making sure that you can always be connected with Arc to give you value add. Again, that could be running SQL Server on premises, could be running SQL Server in other clouds, and getting that richness that Arc provides, including some additional new functionality from a security perspective in SQL 2025, using SSMS to get assistance for copilots. SSMS now offering a copilot experience on premises for you as a SQL assistant connected to any SQL server, and SQL 25 would be one of those. We will always do benchmarks. Benchmarks have certain rules, so you won't see this information show up until we go generally available, but we'll definitely work behind the scenes to make sure we prove ourselves to be a great performance leader in benchmarking. And then we have some things we're working on today that I can't reveal exactly, but I'll reveal next year about making sure we're optimized for the latest hardware generations that you have out there for SQL Server. And then also to make sure you understand that we are built for all platforms. I know what sometimes I talk to customers, they don't realize the fact that SQL can consistently run not just on public clouds, but multi-clouds, but consistently with Windows, Linux, and containers on Kubernetes. And in fact, in the AI space, I think it's going to be some interesting scenarios where customers are going to love the fact that we have now a built-in AI story. So that's kind of the overview of what's in SQL Server 2025 that's new. Now, anytime I've talked about a release of SQL Server over the last few years, I get a set of questions. And maybe these are questions that you have. So let's talk about some of those up front. When will SQL Server be publicly available? Well, to be candid with you, and I've said this before, we don't intend to miss the name. And I realize a lot of you would like to know an exact date, but I can't give you that date today. We always try to make sure we give ourselves flexibility once we go private preview of deciding when a public preview will be announced and launched and when general availability will show up. So it will happen, obviously, next calendar year, but I don't have those dates yet for you to share. As we move into next calendar year, it'll become more obvious what those dates will look like. What about pricing and licensing? We never make announcements of those until general availability. We may ask you during the preview to help give some feedback for us about what that looks like, but you will know at general availability, are there any changes to pricing and licensing? Same thing for editions. We never make decisions, we don't make announcements on what features go in what edition until we go general availability. But again, we might ask your feedback during a private preview period what that looks like. Know this, we fully intend to maintain what we've done starting in SQL 16, and that the surface area of SQL Server from like a T-SQL perspective will be consistent across all of our editions. Upgrading will be the same. The same method you've used today to do upgrading will exist for SQL Server 2025. Which operating systems, which previous SQL Server versions will be supported, we make those decisions during the preview period, and we'll probably ask your feedback if we need to make some decisions there. And then as far as deprecation goes, first of all, we will have a new DB compat level, DB compat 170, which you might see also in the cloud show up first. And then any decisions we make as far as any deprecation, we make those decisions as well during the preview. Nothing to announce today about deprecation. So that's just a few things we have in mind from a frequently asked question perspective. You should know that's kind of orthogonal to the technology, but ones that come up all the time when we announce a new version of SQL Server. So let's spend a little time talking about AI. And I thought it would be interesting for all of you here in the session today to understand a little bit about why you might consider doing Gen AI technology with your database, kind of more generic point of view. A lot of customers are looking at this AI technology and taking advantage of the fact that AI models can take your data, like text data, generate a concept called vectors, and store those inside the security of the database. And then when you have these vector numbers stored in your database associated with your data, you can build a RAG pattern type application, say a prompt app. It could be a chat, it could be an agent. You could take that, and then you can take that prompt from that app, also generate a vector based on these models, and then you can compare your vector of your prompt with your data, and we call that a vector search. And we intend to provide that functionality inside the SQL engine itself. And then, of course, since SQL Server itself has other filtering capabilities, could even be full text search, you can do what we call a hybrid search. You can combine vector searching, similarity searching, and do that with existing filtering with SQL Server today to give you more powerful searching experience. And then as an application developer, you could take the results of that if you'd like to, feed that to a model in addition to the prompt, and get that great generative response that you're used to seeing from language models. Now, one key thing, when I've shown these kind of type things for customers, and they're asking, like, why would I do a vector search versus something that's like a full text search? Well, number one, the prompt that you're sending to do a search may contain things like words that are not found in your data. And that's the beauty of language models, is being able to use language things, phrases, things in sentences that are similar to your data, but not found in your data. And so there's a couple of powerful examples I'll show you in a demonstration of what that looks like. So with that context in mind, what are we doing for SQL Server 2025? So we're giving you the ability to do something like this: build a scalable AI app. Either it's a chat-based, agent-based, whatever you want to do, something that is using AI language model technology to give you more power and application. And of course, on the left-hand side, doing vector search and doing inside the engine where the vectors and the data are co-located in the security of SQL Server is important to do that. But we also want to light up something we call operational RAG. Now, people are using this retrievable augmented generation pattern in a lot of different ways today, but some of the different vector stores are read-only. SQL Server, being a transactional database, of course, supports the ability for you to go make changes to your data. And then your RAG pattern, of course, can then have the ability to go see that data in real time because you're making those changes inside the database itself. And then in addition, with what we call language framework technologies, you can set up the ability where models can even go generate the queries in those RAG patterns I showed you. That could even be against your structured data, or could be in a combination of using things like vector searching. So from a feature perspective, what does that actually look like? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to allow you to build these RAG patterns inside the engine using T-SQL and then frameworks on top of that. And it comes in these feature sets. Number one, SQL can now be considered what's called a vector store. Now, you may have seen this already with Azure SQL database that we've announced. And we intend to make sure that ground to cloud to fabric story is consistent. So what I'm showing and talking about here today will exist in Azure SQL database, in SQL Server, and in SQL database in Fabric. So that native vector store comes in terms of starting with a native vector type, and I'll show you what that looks like. In addition, we want things to be fast to search for vectors, so we will also provide a vector index in the form of what we call a disk and index. You're going to see next calendar year us provide more details of what that looks like. What is a disk and index? What's the details of it? Why is it important? Why would I do it? Those kind of type things. So with that type of vector store in place, how do you generate data for your vectors like I showed in that diagram? Well, we're going to provide model management capabilities. You have the ability to go interface with AI models either on premises or in clouds. And I'll show you kind of a diagram what I mean what that looks like, and also talk about more in the demonstration. Well, that in place, what do you do with this? Well, what you do is you need capabilities in the SQL language to go generate these embeddings based on your data and store them in those vector types. So we'll provide built-in capabilities in the T-SQL language to both what we call chunk your data and generate these embeddings and store them in the vector types based on the model interfaces. And it'll be a very seamless process and very natural to the T-SQL language to do this. Well, if that's all stored, how do you do that vector search? We'll provide T-SQL functions for you to go do the actual vector searching in the form of a function called vector distance, which I'll show you what that looks like today. And then when the vector index comes into play for you to use, you'll be able to use something called vector searching on top of that actual index itself. And again, the whole concept is a new way of searching of your data versus what you've done in the past. Now, you could, if you want to as a developer, simply use APIs or T-SQL commands to do all of the stuff I just showed you there, talked about. But what we've seen is actual AI applications wanting to use what are called frameworks like LangChain and semantic kernel. And we will provide a rich integration with those frameworks for everywhere SQL exists. So anywhere SQL exists, ground to cloud to fabric, that framework integration will exist for you to build those rich AI applications. So that's kind of the feature set of what's going to exist in AI itself. So let's look at a more visual picture of what vector searching and hybrid searching look like. I want you to consider this diagram here with the dashed line being the SQL engine, the process space, and a table in your database. So what you would do using T-SQL or using one of these frameworks is that you will go first create embeddings based on your data. And you're going to store those in a column called a vector type in your actual database. That could be in the existing table where you have your data, or it could be in a separate table where you're going to join with keys to actually go look at that. So how does that work? Well, we're going to provide, remember that model management concept, the embeddings concept. We're going to give the ability to communicate with language models that exist either on premises or in the cloud. And the way we're going to do it out of the gate initially is through REST APIs. So through REST APIs, notice that these models exist out of the boundary of the SQL Server engine. Those REST APIs can be in the cloud like Azure OpenAI. It could be in OpenAI itself. But look at these other icons here, supporting other popular inferencing endpoints like NVIDIA Triton Server, Ollama, Kserve, and BLLM. These are ones we're seeing most popular being used out in the industry. This lights up the ability for you to load your own models with these inferencing endpoints, again, on-prem, could be on the same server as SQL, could be on a different server on your network, or could be in a cloud. Different embedding models, GPT models, Phi-3, Mistra, Llama, even Hugging Face models. That'll be up to you to decide how to go make all that work to generate these embeddings. Now, once you store that in your database, you may have some sort of prompt you want to do a vector search with. So that prompt, you would then take a prompt, take it and use T-SQL to generate another embedding for the prompt. Now you're comparing the embedding for the prompt with what you have in your data, and that's what we call a vector search. And we give you T-SQL functions to go do all of that. Then you might combine that with other filters, other parts of where clauses, could be anything in your database you use today, to put those together as a hybrid search. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind as we're building this out for you. Number one is that when you want to use Azure OpenAI, we will provide a way to securely communicate with Azure OpenAI using managed identities with Arc. Second of all, we will provide with you solutions to show you how to create embeddings for new rows that come in and how to update embeddings for any change to your data. So, we've got some samples out there already in the cloud where we're showing you how to do this. As we move through the private preview program and eventually a public preview, expect a lot of examples from us on how to make this work. And if you join the private preview program, we'll be asking you to help us with some of those great solutions. One of the things we'll talk about in the developer section, but I'll just give a hint to you now, is that the SP invoke external REST endpoint, yes, I know that's a mouthful, is a system procedure in Azure that allows you to communicate to REST endpoints using your data inside the engine. That's coming to SQL Server 2025 with any endpoint. That's going to give you the extensibility to go talk to other AI model providers that we may not support out of the gate. So if somehow you find something that we're not supporting, we're always going to try to provide some extensibility story for you to talk to something else they may not actually be supported, and could be anywhere exist. Again, anywhere we can communicate with a REST endpoint, we can actually go do that. One other thing to keep in mind is this. We've seen a lot of developers wanting to build what we call chat histories and feedbacks. So they're building an AI application. Let's say it's chat-based, a natural language chat, a shopping app, could be any type of app, internal app. And developers want to not just store chat history to put that towards their users, but store feedback. And one of the things we think is interesting about SQL, since Ledger is supported, is we now have this unique characteristics to support a tamper evidence and immutable feedback story. So you're going to go out there and build some sort of chat history. Why not store that history information and feedback in SQL, independent of we're using vectors, and use Ledger to be able to have a way to make that a mutable chat history, so that even administrators can't go in and perhaps hack or change what's going on for the history of the history and feedback. Another consideration that we think is possible is, since fabric mirroring exists, you might consider to mirror your chat history and feedback in SQL, wherever it exists, in the cloud or SQL 25, and then use all the beauty of Fabric with Power BI and analytics to go take a look at what is trends that are going on my chat history, for my chat application with chat history. One last point before I stop and show a demo, and then we'll take some questions, is this. I know all of you today listening in, maybe you're going to watch the video and on demand later, have concerns about AI and security. Totally understandable. Totally understandable. So here's some thoughts for you. Number one, since everything we're providing is inside SQL itself, you have the advantage of controlling all access to AI with SQL security. The model management will have SQL security permissions on it. That SP invoke REST endpoint has SQL permissions on it. You decide who has access to tables with vector types. You make decisions on which models you want to use. You control all of that. You can use any AI model you want, ground and or cloud, because we're providing this building block for you to use REST interfaces to do that. But it's all under the constructs of what you normally are used to in the SQL security system. And then, of course, many of you know that we have row-level security, transparent data encryption, dynamic data masking, other features that are built inside the engine itself that help give you that great security model on data used for vectoring. And then also, everything can be tracked with SQL Server auditing. So anything we're doing here is just part of SQL itself. So what you already use today for auditing can be used to track, hey, who's using AI? How's it getting used? Which data is being used? Which users are doing? Which app? So you have the complete control of how AI is used with SQL inside the engine because of just the security model, the auditing model, everything we have in SQL Server today. Also, one thing that I don't have listed in this slide, and people have asked me about this, is things like content safety, things like PII. There are all sorts of opportunities with these REST interfaces we're providing for you to do filtering with AI models on things of that nature. So there are solutions that we'll be showing you how to build where you can go out here and use content safety models and PII models to filter how things are done from the final application coming back to your system. So keep that in mind as you're talking about security. So let's look at a small demonstration of what this looks like. And then Ty, that's what I'll pause and come back and see what some fun questions that folks have had for us. So this is if you go look at the Ignite recording, I did this live at Ignite, you can see this is all recorded demos, but I'm gonna walk these with you. Now what's fun here, and I think Aaron Stellato will love that I'm showing this. This is the new Management Studio. This is SSMS 21, which is available in public preview today. I have a link at the end of our session for you to look at that. This is new based on Visual Studio 2022 Shell. And in addition, we have a Copilot in private preview for you to sign up if you want to try it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through some mechanics of showing you those things I just talked about with using AI built into SQL Server, and at the end show you a possible web app that is going to be used on top of this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to ask the Copilot in SSMS, how do I connect to an AI model in SQL? And it's going to provide a syntax for something we're providing for model management. So imagine now you being able to go in and use a statement like this. And of course, you have security on this. You're going to be able to come in and provide a statement like this, where you're going to say, hey, I'm going to create an external model, and here's a provider for my model, and here's the location of where the model is. It could be, in this particular case, I'm using the popular on-premises framework called Olama. Olama could be sitting on your server. It could be based on a proxy sitting somewhere in your network. It could even be in cloud somewhere. So you're going to tell us a definition to say, hey, here is a model I want to use, and I want to know the metadata of it to be stored in SQL Server, and then I want to use that model name in other parts of my application, other parts of doing embedding generation and vector searching. This is something that, as you see us come more towards a public version of SQL 25, you'll see us provide this functionality. This will also exist anywhere SQL exists, ground to cloud to fabric. Now, I want to give you an example of what data looks like for vectors. So in this case, I've got a product table with like names, description, price, categories, etc. And I've got a separate table to store the embeddings. So what I'm going to do is I'd like to take the product name plus the description, concatenate them together as a string, and generate embeddings based on that. So I've already gone through the process of doing it. And when you see these tables, you see the new vector type that is supported in the table there. I'm going to go through and run a query what this looks like. Now, the vector type is a binary format inside SQL Server. But when you go view it, you see a character representation of these numbers. Now, here's the key about vectors if you've not seen these before, this concept called embedding. These numbers mean nothing to humans. They mean something to language models. So a language model understands those numbers are numbers that represent that product name plus description together. And they're going to be very useful when it comes to doing vector searching to find out, I'll take a prompt and find out what's most similar based on these product names and descriptions. So now that I've got that stored in my database, I'm showing you an example of what it looks like today out of the gate to go update the table with a generated embedding. So you see here, I can take the product name plus the description from a given row of my table. I can build a stored procedure. That's a stored procedure I built called get embedding. That's going to be able to use REST APIs to talk to my model. And that's the name of the model there. I'm going to feed that text to that stored procedure, take the result, which is a vector type in the case of variable, and I'm going to go update a row in the table with this new vector type. Now, this is what it looks like today. When you see more of our public version of this coming in next year, you're going to see additional functionality. We're going to make this process, what I showed you, even simpler. Imagine doing an insert select statement where you go through and just in your row, you go insert embeddings, or you update the entire row with all your embeddings, or however you want to do it. But imagine more integrated T-SQL function technologies to go do all of this. So with the embeddings in my table, I want to go do one of those vector searchings, right? So let me show you an example of what this looks like from a stored procedure point of view. I've built a stored procedure called find relevant products here. And I'm going to pause this and show you a couple things. This is my stored procedure. And in this particular case, I'm going to accept a prompt from an application, and I'm going to add some other things. Now, the top and min similarity are parameters that I'm going to use to tune the model I'm not going to focus on that right now. That's stuff we're going to show you later as we move through doing AI and SQL. But stock quantity is interesting. I'm going to allow my application to do hybrid searching. I'm going to provide a stock quantity to do additional filtering to my vector searching. So what I'm going to do first here is take that prompt, as you saw in that diagram I showed you earlier, and go generate an embedding for the prompt itself. So I'm talking to an AI model, getting the actual embedding prompt. Now here I'm using the new vector distance function on something called cosine similarity to compare that actual prompt with all the embeddings in my table. And the result that I want to see is which products in my table are most similar to the prompt. And that's what vector distance gives me. Now, when we bring in DISCAN indexing, you're going to see a new procedure called vector search, where you're going to use vector searching against the index to do the same type of concept and not worry so much about the distance. Notice here, I also pass in stock quantity, and I use that as my additional hybrid search. So now what I've done is abstracted the entire use of AI from a developer by using a stored procedure. But behind the scenes, I'm using AI to go get an embedding for my prompt and use my vector searching to come back with a set of results, in addition, filtered by stock quantity. So if I do this, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to go run the procedure. Now, I want you to know something very interesting here. I am giving you a prompt for showing products for people that like to work out. Do you see the words work out anywhere in the product name or description? They don't exist. That's kind of the power of natural language and vector searching. And I think you can all agree, those seem like reasonable products that somebody might use for doing exercising or doing fitness. But I'm using the power of AI and natural language prompt and vector searching to come back with the most similar results to actually go do that. So that's kind of an example of what it looks like. And here's an example of a possible application. This could be used for like a shopping app if you wanted to. In fact, at Ignite, we showed this for SQL Database and Fabric. But for me, I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool if I took this and did an internal app. So what if I did this? And this is the power of generative AI. I'm going to take that vector searching of the product data, but internally for the marketing team, I'm going to help them build ad campaigns. So I'm going to go send this prompt inside SQL to the database to get those results, but tell an AI model, build an ad for those results. This is the beauty of the RAG pattern. I'm taking a general language model who doesn't understand anything about my products, feeding it an instruction to say, build an ad campaign, and it knows what build an ad means in what we see in everyday life. So it's coming back with a possible ad using the results of the vector search to provide to the marketing team an internal AI application to go against their data itself. So this is kind of what we're doing inside SQL 2025, much more to come. So Tayyab, let's stop right now and see what kind of questions we have.
Sure. So we have a lot more questions because
Can you
of the
give me some of the
interesting.
top ones?
Yeah, yeah. So and some of them have more than one. I'll just get them one first and then give others chance. Are there any specific legal or compliance considerations when integrating a database with APIs, particularly in industries like finance, where data security and privacy are critical?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, I'm sure there are. What we're going to do is provide you the building blocks for your business and your application to use AI. It'll be up to you to decide what is the compliance of using AI with those industries or governments. Now, Azure OpenAI itself has a list of compliances and different things they've gone through to use models in Azure OpenAI because that's a managed AI service. If you use AI on premises, this is going to be more up to you to decide, am I meeting those certain compliance? Our job is to provide you the building blocks with your data to go build the AI applications.
Awesome. Alvaro asked, is MS SQL 2025 gonna be available to only use LLMs from Copilot?
The question is that LLMs. So we're providing the building blocks for any AI model, large language models, small language models, medium language models. We're going to provide the building blocks using REST for you to go deploy a model of your choice, and then you use that to generate your embeddings. So it doesn't matter to us which model you use. That's going to be up to you to manage. So it's not going to be limited on a certain set of models. Now, the use of your model, large, small, medium, and which one you use can potentially dictate how good your AI app is, but we're just going to give you those building blocks to go actually go work with those.
Ben asked a question, as a web developer, can I use that database with any kind of API?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk more in the developer section about the generic use of REST API. I'll cover that in a bit.
Sure. Todd Hayden has a question you probably already answered. I have security requirements preventing schema and data leaving the on-prem environment. Would I need to watch out for, like Copilot in SSMS or VS has context menu?
So Copilot and SSMS today will use Azure OpenAI as an AI interface, but there's talk of the team to decide, and we're doing the preview right now of should we allow on-premises AI models to use SSMS Copilot. I encourage you to join the private preview. I'll provide a link at the end, and then you can have more conversation with the SSMS team about that.
Hugo's question, I think you already answered. What's the advantage of doing vector search inside SQL? I think you already answered that. It goes beyond the full text search.
Well, but also it's co-located with your data. Use the security of SQL Server. Azure OpenAI, Azure AI Search indexing is a way to do AI applications outside of SQL. We're providing a way for you to co-locate with your data, and then when we bring in disk and indexing, it's going to be super fast to go do the searching.
The next question I did not understand, but I'll read this if you get it. Couts ask, does this SQL AI have any phone-home? I don't know if this is a service phone home process like other SQL customer phone home. I'm really not sure.
I don't know what that means. Okay. Can you go to the next one?
Yeah, Couts, if you go to put more context, we'll come back. Alex asked, can disk ANN index be combined with B-tree index on same table for hybrid search? In parentheses, filters on embedding combined with filter on attribute. Hint is in Postgres, this is not possible. And a follow-up question, can you index embeddings longer than 1536? Postgres cannot.
So today, 1536 is going to be the dimension we'll support out of the gate. We're looking at expanding that to be bigger. And a disk and index can exist against an actual embedding column. So there's no reason why you can't combine that with another B-tree sort or B-tree base index.
And then there are a few more came when I was talking to you. Can I integrate MS SQL 2025 for models in different cloud providers?
We will not limit, well, I shouldn't say that. We will probably out of the gate with our built-in model management create external model statement support certain types of providers. And OpenAI and Azure OpenAI are the big ones I can think out of my head that we'll support. There's others that we're looking at as well during the preview period. We'd love to have your feedback. Also know that the REST API functionality allows you to talk to any cloud provider, so it doesn't matter. But our integrated model management story may be limited to certain ones. We'll work that out through the preview period.
I think the last one is from my good friend Mark. Can we upload binary content like PDFs into the SQL-based vector store?
I love that question. Please work in the preview with us to figure that out. Yes. I mean, the question is going to be like, how do we do it though? What's the most efficient way to take even things like documents, classify them, organize them, chunk them, and put them in for vector storing? Look for next calendar year us to be digging into solutions just like that.
Even though I said last one, I'm going to read this one. If you are on the private preview and using features that are later determined to be enterprise level, will you need to purchase the enterprise license, or we are grandfathered due to being in the private preview?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. What's the question?
Okay, if we are on the private preview and using features that are later determined to be enterprise only, will you need to purchase the enterprise license, or we are grandfathered due to being in the private preview?
Yeah, private preview is a free program to use SQL Server for free. And you help us give us feedback during the release. It's totally independent of actually a licensing that you would purchase SQL Server. So it has so if you go rely on a feature in the SQL Server previews, right, that end up being enterprise only, there's not going to be a way for us to say, oh, you get a free enterprise license, or, I'm sorry, you only got standard edition. That's not how any of the preview programs work.
Yeah, I think I'll stop here. There are more questions. We'll come back at the end. You go ahead.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So, again, I purposely put a lot of AI into this presentation because it's one of the biggest things we're doing in the release. But fabric mirroring is important. And you may have seen already today us support this. Azure SQL Database is in general availability. Azure SQL Managed Instance is a public preview. Even SQL Server for SQL 16 through 2022 is in private preview. And I've got a link here on this page here where you can sign up to go help us go try that. SQL Server 2025 will also be enabled so you can mirror data to the Microsoft Fabric. We will be using the change feed features that we've used in the cloud to do that. There's nothing new here for SQL 2025 that's going to show up for mirroring. It's going to be identical to what we're doing in other places. Just know that it's part of the whole mirroring story. There's a lot of information out there on mirroring for you to go take a look at independent of this. I've even done some presentations. There's stuff back from the Fabric conference and also at Microsoft Ignite for you to go look at that. Here's why I'm really excited besides just the AI story. Not only are we supporting GraphQL, Data API Builder is very popular out there. That's supported today for SQL Server. We'll continue to do that. But here's some new things that I think are going to excite developers. Number one, a native JSON type and a JSON index on that type, and new T-SQL functions to do contained searches for those JSON types. Really excited to see that land for SQL Server 2025. That's also in the cloud. We've already announced the preview program for regular expression support for T-SQL. That will also land in SQL Server 2025. And then here's where it gets fun. Change event streaming. Attention, all Kafka developers. SQL Server coming to Kafka. So yes, we will now provide the ability for developers using Azure Event Hub with Kafka compatibility to go out there and build a Kafka-based or Azure Event Hub-based application to consume transaction log changes as events to your application. Imagine you out there taking a SQL Server on premises or in a cloud, multi-cloud, Azure VM, and instead of using mirroring, instead of using an AG, you want to build your own application to consume events and do whatever you want. Build a microservice, do a caching system, an auditing system. You will now have the ability to do that on a feature called Change Event Streaming. That's also going to exist ground to cloud. And then somebody asked us earlier, you're a developer. You would like to go and build a new application that uses REST APIs. And you're like, but I got data in SQL Server that I want to go send to that REST endpoint. And again, that REST endpoint could be on your network or in any cloud. I want to send data to that REST endpoint from my database, and I want to get results back and put it in my database, or however you want to do it. We will now take that SP invoke external REST endpoints procedure, open that up in the engine for any REST interface. And remember, you control the security of using that functionality. In fact, there's an SP configure option to go even turn on the use of it. And then you control the permissions of use as a procedure. Most people are actually creating their own stored procedure to abstract it. But I just had somebody I was talking to in the preview program just last week who didn't know this was possible and now has all these ideas where they would use a client app to do REST APIs, but instead they're going to put that REST functionality inside the engine because they have the ability to, put this functionality inside SQL and co-locate that data. So any REST endpoint is going to line up anywhere in the cloud, anywhere you can get access with security to do it. You're going to be able to do that with SQL Server. So some really great, rich developer features are coming to SQL Server 2025, and I'm very excited we're bringing this to developers. Now, what do we do in the space of security? The biggest thing we're doing in security is supporting managed identity now. Microsoft Defender will be there, as it's always been there for SQL servers, but SQL's managed identities have only been supported in Azure so far. We use Arc to support Microsoft Entra authentication. So now with SQL Server 2025, you will be able to use managed identities for passwordless authentication to SQL Server on premises, and even use it for certain outbound scenarios like backup to Azure storage or using Entra for TDE encryption or something of that nature. So having that rich managed identity passwordless experience, you get to integrate that now into the security of SQL Server using Entra. Arc is needed to make that work, but you have the ability now to do that. That's also a way how we'll support the security model for Azure OpenAI with SQL Server is being able to use managed identities instead of having to put an API key in as a credential for your database. There's some other things in the security space that we're doing that I can't reveal to you yet, but there's some great work we're going to be doing here. You'll see more of that next year. Now, there's some other things about the core engine people have been asking me about, like, are you even investing in the core engine? There's more coming, but I want to give you a kind of an overview of things that we're doing. So first of all, if you've not taken a look at optimized locking in Azure SQL that exists today, we're bringing that into SQL Server 2025. So think of scenarios where lock escalation is hurting you, scenarios where you're running applications where lock memory is causing problems from your app. This new optimized locking feature that we had to enable for a database really helps improve concurrency for scenarios for your actual application. That's coming to SQL Server 2025. In addition, in the performance space, there's several things we're doing. So number one, we're improving the performance of batch mode for certain types of aggregate functions, and even improving just batch mode itself natively. We've got some column store improvements. For example, now you can do an online index rebuild for clustered column store indexes. Some other improvements for indexing for column store coming in SQL 2025. And in the query processing and execution space, there's a couple of targeted things we're doing. There's some other things that the team is working on that we'll learn more about next calendar year. But for example, persisted stats on secondaries using Query Store, using Query Store on read replicas. I know that's a feature that in 2022 required a trace flag that will not require a trace flag anymore in 2025. We are looking to actually eliminate that also in 2022, but for sure in 2025 that's coming. Optimizing the use of ad hoc queries with XP Execute SQL. Those are just some of the things we're doing in the query processing space. We've got an additional feature for parameter-sensitive plan optimization for optional parameters we're adding as well. So look for more. I think I told you in the beginning of the session today, look for more in calendar year 2025 for me to provide more details in this engine space of things we're doing. On the availability space, we have found several scenarios, and quite frankly, you as a community help drive some of this agenda for us. And that is, we found areas in availability groups where we were not reliably failing over. Scenarios where people had to manually intervene and restart instances to make it actual failover correctly. And we've shored those up. We've had some enhancements inside the actual core pieces of availability groups to make that more rich, and added more diagnostics for you and things like health timeouts occur and so forth. So some areas in the availability group space we're actually enhancing in SQL Server 2025. As I said, I have some stuff in my back pocket I wish I could tell you today. I usually don't reveal things publicly that I'm not 100% confident will be in the release of SQL Server 2025. I've got some that I'm pretty confident in. And so, as we move through next calendar year, you'll actually get to see more about that. So I want to point out a couple things here before I take our final questions today. Number one, if you're thinking about some events in next calendar year to go to hear more about SQL 2025 or even other things we're doing, Visual Studio Live is a developer conference in March in Las Vegas. I will be doing a keynote session there. I'll be doing also additional sessions on SQL 25. Look for me, for example, to unveil how change event streaming works there, JSON support, et cetera. Other things with AI samples. So I'll be there in March. Other members of our team will be there as well. And then I think Tayyab alluded to earlier, the Fabric Community Conference is now back again in Las Vegas. And I realize it's called the Fabric Community Conference, but the SQL team will be there in force. We'll be there to talk about SQL Database and Fabric, about SQL Server 2025, about Azure SQL. I think the team is thinking about doing like an all-day AI workshop, all sorts of great stuff like that. So get ready for that. Here's some information. There's actually a discount right now. Sorry, I should go back here. I forgot to tell you. The VS Live team has given me a discount. If you use the code WARD to sign up for VS Live, I think you get $500 off the registration. And I think that's available here until the end of the year. Same thing it goes for this. You have a code of MSCUST as a discount to save money to go to the Fabric Community Conference. But again, I'm just giving you some opportunities that I know are going to come up next spring where you can learn more in person about SQL Server 2025, but also about other parts of things we're doing like SQL Database in Fabric. Okay, I know you want to try to sign up. So here is the sign up, a QR code, also SQL EAP sign up. That is if you want to sign up for the private preview of SQL Server 2025. If you want to sign up for Copilot in SSMS, that's also the link to sign up for Copilot. Now, SSMS 21 in preview is available to download for free. You can just download that today. In fact, there was an update Aaron and team just made about that. So if you go to the SSMS site, aka.ms SSMS, in fact, I created a new one called aka.ms SSMS 21. If you go there, you can download that preview and get a feel of what that looks like. And yes, if you missed the moment in the past keynote, it does support dark mode now, which was a big ask, of course, so many years from so many customers. The Copilot functionality is separate from that. So if you want to do Copilots, you need to sign up for a separate private preview with us to start testing that functionality. And here's some different requirements for you to come in and sign up with us for SQL 25 and Copilot SSMS. So the way the private preview program works, by the way, is you sign up, you kind of tell us a little bit how you plan to help work with us to test SQL Server. And to be candid with you, we're really looking for customers and for developers and administrators that really want to help us test out the functionality. We develop these private preview builds on a monthly basis where we update new features. We've got internal sites where you work directly with our team to go test it out, ask us questions. Then, of course, next year when we go public, that'll be the time for everybody to see what's going to be the entire release, you to download it and try it out yourself. Of course, when we go public preview, we always have an evaluation edition, a developer edition. And then as we move towards GA, that's when we finally release our actual final editions. So I really appreciate your time today, Tayyab. I think we've got plenty of time here left to answer some more questions. I'd love to, and I know somebody has their hand raised, but I think we're trying to keep our questions only to the chat. But I'm happy to answer the final questions today. Tayyab, if you'll go ahead and feed them to me.
Sure. So I'll read some of those. Am I allowed to use SQL Server 2025 Community Technology Preview for my personal upskilling purpose without mentioning my business email address, because at work I'm still supporting 2019?
Yeah, so go ahead and fill out the form. You can use your personal address, but you're going to have to work with us to do an NDA with Microsoft and your personal address. So you're allowed to do that, but you need to sign up an NDA with us to do it.
What is the time complexity as compared to normal query without AI?
I'm sorry, what was the type complexity?
Time
Complexity. Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really, really good question. When you start the private preview program and what you see today publicly announced for Azure, it's going to feel a little complex. When we have publicly the bits that we have in place and for our intentions of what I showed you for model management, vector indexing, it's going to get real simpler. So I think in the beginning, it's going to feel a little more complex to you. Then it's going to get a lot more simpler. What's going to be interesting for you is the decision you're going to make on what application is going to use this. Because anybody can just run these T-SQL commands to do vector searching. But what we found is customers want to start using these frameworks like LangChain to go build these applications. That's where some of the learning may kick in and be a little more difficult. So I'm encouraging customers to start small, do some sort of proof of concept with some internal app or something, just get used to vector searching. We've got samples for you to use to go try it all out. So it's going to feel a little more harder at the beginning. That's going to get a lot simpler for you as we move on.
Thank you. So this is a follow-up from the phone home that I asked you before. I meant phone home, which sends information back to Microsoft, such as customer experience improvement program that sends telemetry data, for example, SQL Server CIP service.
Right. There's no change to CIP. It's the same. We have no plans to make any changes. So that's the same CIP service that we've done before.
Okay, thanks. Any plans to upgrade SQL Server's XQuery and XSD to match current standards? XQuery 4.0 equally supports XML and JSON.
Nothing in the roadmap. I know in the release right now to make any changes to what you just asked for. Doesn't mean that we won't do it, but there's nothing I have in the roadmap right now to announce.
Thank you. Is optimized locking equivalent to MVCC of PG? I think PG means Postgres, so.
Not exactly. I wouldn't look at it that way. This is more the ability to reduce things like lock escalation and to avoid lock memory problems for very large locking problems. So I wouldn't make those equivalent to that feature in Postgres.
Okay, thanks. What about partitioning gap with PostgreSQL?
I'm not sure I understand the question. There's nothing I have right now in the books to make any changes to partitioning for SQL that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean we won't do it, but there's nothing I can announce today that we're doing.
This is a very logistic question. Is Fabric Community Conference available for online attendees? I doubt that, but you might know more.
What's the question?
If the Fabric Conference will be available for online attendees.
I don't believe it's online. It has not been in the last two that we've had. Now, what they do is they sometimes publish some of the sessions online afterwards, but I'm not aware of any intentions they have to make that an online event.
Okay. And compliment to you, it says, Raymond says, have really appreciated Bob's SQL Server 2022 reveal book. So I'm hoping there might also be plans for the SQL Server 2025 reveal book next year.
Well, it's so kind of you to ask that. I just released the second edition of Azure SQL Revealed. I did a book signing at the past summit, and the number one question I got in the line of people signing books was, "When's the next one?" So, that's very kind of you to say that. You never know when a new book might show up, and certainly 2025 is a great topic to do it with. So you never know.
Are there any plans for active clustering in SQL 2025?
No plans that I can talk about today.
Okay. The AI workshop is at what event? So I think, Bob, you said in the Fabric conference, you might do a full day AI workshop, if I got it right.
Yeah, I think so. So one, I'm going to flip back here for a second for the Fabric conference. So the
Sure.
team right now internally is there's some things already published on the website today, but our team is going to be doing some workshops, and you can bet AI is going to be a part of that. So if you're trying to figure out what workshops to sign up for, if you can kind of have a little patience there, you're going to see very shortly those show up. So yes, our team is going to have a workshop. I guarantee one's going to be involving AI. Certainly SQL database and Fabric will also be some other topics that we'll be doing as well.
And I just want to add one thing. You already have some stuff in GitHub for
We do.
AI workshop, which is very helpful. I've been like gave a talk at SQL Server Houston, mostly using your materials. I'll be very public about it.
Oh,
So,
awesome. Yeah, if you go to ak.ms SQL AI workshop, there is already some great information up there for you to use today.
any enhancements for SSIS or MDS or SSRS or SSAS components with 2025?
Yeah, great question. Nothing I can announce today that we're doing for those services.
Okay. I will post the link for the recording again. Those of you asked, it was in the slide deck, but if you go to YouTube and search for DBA-VUG, you will be able to find it, but I'm going to put it in the chat again. Bob, no other question that you need to answer. So we will stop the recording here. And then
Taib, I just want to say before you stop the recording, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for everyone. It's hard to take away from your job to go spend an hour with me. So I really appreciate your time today. Hey, SQL is alive and well, despite contrary rumors to the fact. And in next calendar year, you're going to see a lot more information for us talking about this great release. So thanks for the opportunity today, Taib, to come on.
Thank you, Bob, again. So I'm going to stop recording and I'll put the link again for those of you who want the recording link. Just hang on for a minute. And Bob, thank you again, and we'll see you in some other event. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.